Do you remember the smell of freshly cut grass on a Sunday morning? The sound of the ball game crackling through the radio? The sight of your dad reading a newspaper or flipping burgers on a rusty old grill? That was my summer in the 70s. The year was 1976, America's bicentennial year, and while the whole country was celebrating, Grandma was planning the perfect meals that would become family legend. I found her old recipe box, so we are bringing back those meals she made on Father's Day. And the meal that started it all was meatloaf. That meatloaf was thick, rich, and always glazed to perfection. She'd shape it into a perfect loaf with hands that had kneaded 1,000 Sunday meals. Then blanket it in brown gravy so rich it could make a grown man weep. Grandma told me that her secret wasn't in the recipe card tucked behind the flour canister, but the way she'd mix it with saltine crackers, a splash of ketchup, and she'd always made it while humming Patsy Cline with a whole lot of love in her heart. Grandpa would always ask for seconds, not because he was still hungry, but because asking meant she'd beam with pride, and maybe share the story of how her mother taught her this very recipe during the Great Depression. Her old skillet would sing as she lowered pieces of chicken she'd seasoned with a pinch of this and a dash of that into oil that had been heating since dawn. Her fried chicken had a crust that crackled like autumn leaves, golden brown and seasoned with tradition. While the chicken fried, mountains of potatoes became clouds of mashed potatoes, whipped with real butter until they were light enough to float. Grandpa would sneak into the kitchen for quality control, stylishly helping himself to crispy bits of skin when he thought she wasn't looking. But Grandma always knew, and she always pretended not to notice. Salisbury steak meant Sunday was serious business. Grandma would form those oval patties like a sculptor, each one perfectly shaped and ready for the skillet that had already browned onions to sweet perfection. The gravy would bubble and thicken, filling the kitchen with the kind of aroma that made neighbors suddenly remember they needed to borrow a cup of sugar. When she'd slide that plate across the table to Grandpa, covered in onions and swimming in gravy, he'd always pause for just a moment, not to say grace, but to appreciate the woman who'd turned ground beef into pure love. Grandma. Just like everyone back then, new pot roast required patience, and she had plenty. She'd rise early to get that roast into the oven, surrounded by carrots that would surrender their sweetness and potatoes that would drink up every drop of flavor. The house would fill with the slow, steady perfume of meat becoming tender, vegetables becoming silk, and time becoming precious. Hours later, when Grandpa carved that roast at the head of the table, steam would rise like incense, and the meat would fall apart at the touch of his fork. Some meals were just dinner, but pot roast was Sunday afternoon slow-cooked into memory. Ham steak meant Grandma was feeling fancy. She'd arrange those perfect pineapple rings like golden halos around thick slices of ham, the sweet juice caramelizing in the skillet until everything gleamed. The combination of salty ham and sweet pineapple was pure poetry on a plate, the kind of meal that made Sunday feel different from every other day of the week. Grandpa would always save one piece of pineapple for last, letting the sweetness linger while he praised Grandma's cooking loud enough for the neighbors to hear through the open kitchen window. Beef stroganoff was Grandma's way of bringing a little sophistication to Sunday dinner. She'd slice that beef paper thin, sauté it with mushrooms and onions until the kitchen smelled like a fancy restaurant, then fold it all into sour cream that turned everything velvet smooth. Served over egg noodles wide enough to hold every drop of sauce, it was comfort food dressed up for company. Grandpa would twirl those noodles around his fork like he was conducting an orchestra, savoring every bite while telling Grandma she'd outdone herself again, and meaning every word of it. The baked chicken and rice casserole was pure Grandma genius and creativity disguised as simplicity. Grandma would layer rice, chicken, and vegetables in her favorite casserole dish, the one with the tiny chip on the handle that she refused to replace because it had served so many family meals. As it baked, the rice would absorb every drop of chicken flavor, becoming creamy and rich without any stirring or fussing. When she'd pull it from the oven, bubbling and golden, Grandpa would shake his head in wonder at how she could make something so delicious look so effortless. Pork chops and applesauce meant autumn had found its way to Grandma's table, even in the middle of June. She'd brown those chops until they had a crust that promised tenderness within. Then serve them alongside applesauce that still had tiny pieces of apple skin for texture. The sweet and savory dance on the plate reminded everyone of harvest festivals and county fairs, of simpler times when meals were events and families lingered at tables long after the last bite was gone. Grandpa would always ask if she'd made the applesauce from scratch, knowing full well she had. Tuna noodle casserole was just good old home cooking. And in Grandma's kitchen, that was enough. She'd mix egg noodles, canned tuna, and cream of mushroom soup with the same care she used on holiday meals. Then she'd top it with crushed potato chips, usually whatever brand was on sale, and bake it until the top was golden and crispy. What could have been just another quick dinner always felt like something extra when she made it. It was warm, filling, and made with love. Grandpa always went back for more, and Grandma would smile because she knew exactly what he meant. When it was spaghetti night at Grandma's, you knew dinner was going to be worth the wait. She'd simmer that meat sauce for hours, the tomatoes and herbs creating an aroma that could stop traffic on a quiet Sunday afternoon. The garlic bread would emerge from the oven golden and fragrant, butter pooling in every perfect indentation. When she'd twirl that first forkful for Grandpa, sauce clinging to the pasta like silk, he'd close his eyes and declare it better than any restaurant in the city. Though she used the same recipe and made it the same way every time, it tasted even better than he remembered. Green bean casserole wasn't the star of the meal, but Grandma wouldn't set the table without it. She didn't need a recipe card. She had it memorized. She'd fold canned green beans into Campbell's cream of mushroom soup and top it with those crispy onions. It baked until the top turned golden brown and the edges bubbled. You didn't ask if it would be there. It always was. Not because it was fancy, but because it was Grandma's way. Grandpa always loaded up his plate, joking that he was getting his greens. But everyone knew he came back for seconds because of her. Deviled eggs were Grandma's way of making something fancy from something simple. She'd have those perfect hard-boiled eggs with the precision of a surgeon, mixing the yolks with mayonnaise and mustard until the filling was smooth as silk. A sprinkle of paprika on top made each egg look like a tiny sunset on the serving plate. Grandpa would always reach for one before dinner was even served, earning a gentle swat from Grandma's dish towel and a smile that said she'd made extra just for his pre-dinner raids on the appetizer table. Coleslaw with vinegar dressing meant Grandma was serious about balancing out all that rich Father's Day cooking. She'd shred cabbage and carrots with the precision of a surgeon, then dress it all in a tangy vinegar mixture that could wake up your taste buds from 3 bites away. The slaw would sit in the refrigerator, getting better by the hour as the flavors married, and the cabbage softened just enough to be perfect. Grandpa would always pile it high on his plate, claiming it helped cut through all the gravy. Though everyone suspected he just loved the way the tangy crunch played against Grandma's rich comfort food. And after the coleslaw came baked macaroni and cheese, Grandma's masterpiece of a comfort meal. She'd cook those elbow noodles until they were just tender enough, then fold them into a cheese sauce so rich it could have been served at the finest restaurants. The top would bake to golden perfection, creating a crust that gave way to creamy, dreamy goodness beneath. When Grandpa would take that first bite, the cheese would stretch from his fork to the casserole dish, and he'd always declare it the best mac and cheese in 3 counties, a claim that was never disputed at Grandma's table. Apple pie crowned every Father's Day meal like the perfect ending to Grandma's love story. She'd roll that crust by hand, filling it with apples that had been peeled with the same paring knife she'd used for 30 years. The kitchen would fill with the scent of cinnamon and sugar as it baked, promising sweetness to come. When she'd serve it warm with vanilla ice cream melting into creamy rivers alongside each slice, Grandpa would always pause before the first bite, savoring the moment when anticipation was about to become pure satisfaction. Some things were worth waiting for, and Grandma's apple pie was definitely one of them. Besides the apple pie, Grandma's way of bringing a little elegance to the Father's Day or any other Sunday spread was Waldorf salad with apples and walnuts. She'd dice crisp apples and celery with the same care she put into her finest dishes, then fold in walnuts that added just the right amount of crunch. The mayonnaise dressing would coat everything in creamy perfection, making each bite a symphony of textures and flavors. When she'd serve it in her best crystal bowl, the one reserved for special occasions, Grandpa would always comment on how fancy it looked, then proceed to eat 2 helpings while praising the perfect balance of sweet apples and crunchy walnuts. Banana pudding was the perfect ending to any Father's Day feast. Grandma would layer vanilla wafers, sliced bananas, and homemade pudding with the patience of someone who understood that good things took time. The vanilla wafers would soften just enough to meld with the pudding, while the bananas added sweetness that tasted like childhood memories. When Grandpa would dig his spoon down through all the layers, getting a perfect bite of everything in one mouthful, he'd close his eyes and smile the kind of smile that said, home wasn't a place. It was a flavor. Grandma's meals held the kind of magic that went beyond recipes. Those flavors and memories still linger in our hearts. Please share this with someone who'd love to remember too, so more people can share in these good old times. I'll be here next week with more stories like this. Until then, celebrate American nostalgia and make new good memories.